Miami Stadium, July 4th, 2026, 103rd minute. Extra time. Argentina, three-time world champions, reigning holders, the team of Lionel Messi, are leading 2-1 against a nation most of the watching world could not have found on a map 3 weeks ago. And then a left back from a country of 500,000 people picks up the ball on the edge of the penalty area, shapes it with the outside of his boot, and curls it perfectly, beautifully, impossibly, into the top corner of the net. 2-2. The Argentina goalkeeper punches the air in disbelief. Emiliano Martinez, the man who saved penalties in a World Cup final, standing behind his goal with his hands on his head. The commentators have lost their voices. 64,478 people inside Miami Stadium have lost the ability to process what they are watching. A nation of 500,000 people. 10 volcanic islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Their first ever World Cup. And they just equalized against Argentina in extra time. This is the story of Cabo Verde. And it is one of the greatest stories that football has ever had the privilege to tell. Find Cabo Verde on a map. Go to the northwest coast of Africa. Look west into the Atlantic. 385 miles offshore, in the middle of open ocean. 10 small volcanic islands rising from the seafloor like ancient fists. Rocky, windswept, remote, beautiful in the way that only truly isolated places can be. The total land area of all 10 islands combined, 4,033 square kilometers. That is smaller than the English county of Lincolnshire. That is smaller than the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area. The entire national population, just over 525,000 people. There are individual football clubs in England, just the matchday attendance, not even the fan base, who fill a stadium larger than 0.1% of Cabo Verde's population every other weekend. To put it another way, Argentina, their opponents on July 4th, has a population of roughly 45 million. Argentina has 85 times more people than the entire country of Cabo Verde. And yet here they were, in Miami, in their first World Cup, making Argentina run in circles for 120 minutes. To understand how this happened, you have to understand what football means to people who grow up knowing that the world's biggest stages were built for someone else. Cabo Verde has played international football since 1978. Their very first match was a 1-0 loss to Guinea. They joined FIFA in 1982. They tried to qualify for the World Cup for the first time in 2003. For 22 years after that first attempt, the World Cup was something the people of Cabo Verde watched from the same place as the rest of the world. On television, on screens, from a distance, dreaming, watching, waiting. Then in October 2025, after a qualifying campaign that defied every sensible expectation, it happened. Coach Bubista, Pedro Brito da Gama, a man who has spent years building something real on those islands, guided Cabo Verde through an African qualifying group that included Angola, Libya, and most notably Cameroon. Let us talk about Cameroon for a moment. 7 Africa Cup of Nations titles, 8 World Cup appearances, the indomitable Lions, a nation with a football culture 100 times older and deeper than Cabo Verde's. Roger Milla dancing by the corner flag, Samuel Eto'o, Patrick Mboma, Marc-Vivien Foé. Cabo Verde beat them, qualified ahead of them, and earned their place at the World Cup for the very first time in their entire history. The scenes on those islands that night, in Praia, in Mindelo, in Santa Maria, were unlike anything those places had ever seen. But here is where the story gets even stranger. Many of the Cabo Verde squad don't live in Cabo Verde. The islands are small. The domestic league is limited. Players scatter to Portugal, Belgium, the Netherlands, to whatever club in whatever country will have them. The diaspora of Cabo Verdean people is actually larger than the population of Cabo Verde itself. More Cabo Verdeans live abroad than on the islands. Coach Bubista tracked some of his players down through LinkedIn. Not scouting trips, not academy networks, not through agents or intermediaries. LinkedIn. He searched for players with Cabo Verdean heritage scattered across European football's lower divisions, wrote them a message, and asked if they wanted to play for their country. Some of them had barely been to the islands. Some had never played senior international football, and yet assembled, built from diaspora, determination, a coach willing to look anywhere, and an unshakable belief that the World Cup could be theirs, they qualified. That was the miracle. Everything after that was something else. Before we talk about Argentina and Messi, before we talk about 103 minutes, before we talk about what Messi whispered after the final whistle, we have to talk about a goalkeeper. A 40-year-old goalkeeper named Vozinha. His real name is Josemar José Évora Diaz, but in Cabo Verde, everybody calls him Vozinha. The nickname means little grandma in Portuguese. He earned it because of his grandparents. Born in Mindelo, a port city of 70,000 people on the island of São Vicente, Vozinha's father was serving in the military when he was born. His mother had to work to survive, so Vozinha was raised entirely and completely by his grandparents. They were not his babysitters. They were his parents, his foundation, his entire world. He was born to be a striker, he has said. His father even wanted to name him Valdano, after the Argentine striker Jorge Valdano, who scored in the 1986 World Cup final against West Germany. The authorities did not allow it. He became Josemar. And then, because of his grandparents, he became Vozinha. He did not turn professional until he was 25 years old. In most careers, that is already late. By 25, most professional players are already established in their clubs, already recognized, already earning the money and the recognition that come with reaching the top level. For Vozinha, 25 was just the beginning of a very long road through a lot of very obscure places. He played for Batuk in Cape Verde, then clubs in Portugal, then Progresso in Angola, then Zimbru in Moldova, then Gil Vicente in Portugal, then AEL Limassol in Cyprus, where he won his only career trophy, the Cypriot Cup in 2019, then AS Trenčín in Slovakia. 19 years of professional football, one trophy, dozens of clubs, dozens of countries, dozens of suitcases packed and unpacked in places most football fans will never visit. Statistics providers have not even tracked all of his appearances. Some of the leagues he played in were so far below the radar that nobody bothered to keep proper records. He has estimated he played at least 200 professional matches, maybe more. The exact number, like so much of his career, exists somewhere between the lines of databases that nobody ever bothered to update. And through all of it, every cold training ground in Eastern Europe, every quiet stadium in Cyprus, every transfer to the next club in the next country, where he would be a useful stopgap rather than a celebrated goalkeeper, he kept one dream alive: to play for Cabo Verde, to reach a World Cup, to make those 10 islands proud. He has said publicly that there were moments he thought about quitting. The grind was real. The rewards were small. The recognition was zero. But he kept going. Because of the dream. Because of those islands. Because of his grandparents who believed in him when the rest of the world had not yet noticed he existed. In 2026, Vozinha was 40 years old. The World Cup was happening. And Cabo Verde had qualified for the first time in history. He was named in the squad. He was named as the starter. And at 40 years and 12 days old, older than Spain's Lamine Yamal's entire life, he walked out onto the pitch for Cabo Verde's first ever World Cup match. Lamine Yamal was born in 2007. In 2007, Vozinha was making his professional debut for Batuk in Cabo Verde. He has been a professional goalkeeper for longer than Spain's most exciting young talent has been alive. Nobody gave Cabo Verde a chance against Spain. The European champions, one of the pre-tournament favorites, Lamine Yamal, Nico Williams, Pedri, Ferran Torres, a squad worth over €1 billion, a team that had arrived at this tournament with genuine expectations of winning it, against a goalkeeper from a town of 70,000 people who turned professional at 25 and had spent 19 years playing in countries nobody watches. For 90 minutes, Spain threw everything at him. 27 shots in total, 7 directly on target. Their brightest young stars came off the bench specifically to try to break Vozinha down. He saved every single one. Everyone. He made 7 saves. He recorded 68 touches, the most by any goalkeeper in a regulation World Cup match since Croatia's Drazen Ladic kept goal against the Netherlands back in 1998. The entire time, Cabo Verde barely touched the ball. Spain dominated possession. Spain dominated territory. Spain had more chances in that one match than most teams accumulate in an entire group stage. And Vozinha stood in that goal and refused to be beaten. The final score was 0-0. The man of the match was a 40-year-old journeyman goalkeeper from a nation of 500,000 people. When the final whistle blew, Vozinha walked off the pitch and collapsed in tears. Not tears of relief, tears of grief and love and impossible gratitude all arriving at once. His grandparents had died in the years before this. They did not get to see it, and his mother had not been able to get her visa in time. The money ran out. The paperwork was too slow. She sat in Mindelo, watching on a screen, as her son became the talk of the world. "I cried," he said afterward, "because I grew up with my grandparents, and unfortunately they were not here. They did everything for me. Everything. I also cried because my mom didn't manage to be here because of the visa. The money we had to pay, we didn't manage on time. I would like her to be here." Within hours of the final whistle, his Instagram following went from 46,000 followers to over 1 million. By the end of the tournament, it would reach 14 million. Paul Pogba praised him on social media. Thierry Henry called him extraordinary. Zlatan Ibrahimovic, who praises almost nobody, said his name. Vozinha became the third oldest goalkeeper ever to keep a World Cup clean sheet, behind only the great Peter Shilton and the legendary Dino Zoff. Names from football's deepest history, names that people study in textbooks. Now sharing a record with a 40-year-old from a town in the Atlantic Ocean most people had never heard of. Cabo Verde were not even close to finished. Their second match was against Uruguay, another South American giant. Another team expected to manage this island nation comfortably. Cabo Verde scored first. They led Uruguay. They absorbed pressure. They fought back after conceding. They scored their first ever World Cup goal. A moment that sent those 10 islands into absolute delirium. The game ended 2-2. In 2 matches at their first ever World Cup, Cabo Verde had held the European champions and drawn with Uruguay. Their third group game, against Saudi Arabia, ended 0-0. 3 games, 3 draws, 0 defeats. Then came Argentina, then came Messi. Miami Stadium, July 4th, 2026. Round of 32. The reigning world champions. The team of the greatest player alive. A squad assembled at extraordinary expense. A nation of 45 million people who had not slept properly since the 2022 final in Qatar. Lionel Messi arrived at this match with 6 goals already in the tournament. 6 goals in 3 group stage games. A hat trick in the opener. The all-time leading scorer in World Cup history. A 39-year-old man playing in his 6th World Cup at a pace and a level that made no sense at all. Argentina scored first. Of course they did. 29th minute. Lisandro Martinez lofted a perfect ball over the top of the Cabo Verde defense. Messi took one touch with the outside of his left boot, looked up, lifted it over Vozinha into the roof of the net. His 20th World Cup goal. All-time record. Argentina 1-0. This was the moment most of the watching world assumed when the fairy tale would politely take its bow and allow reality to return. The greatest player alive had just scored against them. The world champions were ahead. The dream had been beautiful. It was time for it to end. Nobody told Cabo Verde. For the next 60 minutes, the pattern of every previous Cabo Verde match at this tournament repeated itself. They sat deep. They organized. They denied space. They absorbed. They ran. They covered. They refused. Kevin Pina, Cabo Verde's libero, their tactical fulcrum, the most intelligent player on their pitch, was the best player on the park for long, extended stretches of that match. Argentina had the ball. Argentina had possession statistics that made the game look like a training session. But Messi himself would later admit what the scoreline could not hide. At his post-match press conference, the greatest player alive sat in front of journalists and said these exact words. "They always had an extra man because we couldn't match up. That's why they kept the ball and made us run, because we couldn't press them properly." Messi, talking about Cabo Verde, saying that a team from a nation the size of a mid-sized city made Argentina unable to press, unable to organize, unable to find the solutions they needed. That is not a compliment offered generously. That is a professional assessment from the most experienced player at the tournament, acknowledging that the Blue Sharks were a tactical problem that Argentina struggled to solve for 120 minutes. The story ends in the cruelest way football knows. 111th minute. Messi swung a corner into the box. Christian Romero rose highest. The header deflected off the arm of Cabo Verde defender Dini Borges. Cruel angle. Wrong direction. Nothing Vozinha could do. 3-2 Argentina. In the dying moments, Lopez Cabral stepped up for a free kick in a dangerous position. Perfectly struck. Heading for the corner. Emiliano Martinez, one of the best goalkeepers at this tournament, flung himself to his right and saved it. 120 minutes. A deflected own goal in the 111th minute. That was the difference between Cabo Verde and Argentina. Not quality, not talent, not desire. A deflection. After the final whistle, Lionel Messi did something that told you everything about what the world witnessed that night. He could have walked off the pitch. He could have headed to the tunnel. He had done what was required. He had won. Instead, he went looking for Vozinha. He walked across the pitch, found a 40-year-old goalkeeper from a town of 70,000 people, and held him. And then, by Vozinha's own account, Messi looked at him and said 4 words. "You are great. The greatest player alive." To the most unlikely hero of the tournament. 4 words. Vozinha wept again. Not for the loss. For what those 4 words meant after 19 years of packing suitcases and playing in stadiums that the world never noticed. In the dressing room, there were tears. Nobody was hiding the grief. Nobody was pretending. These players had given everything for 4 matches in their country's first World Cup. They had come within a deflection of taking the reigning world champions to penalties. Coach Bubista faced the press conference alone. He struggled to find the right words because the right words do not really exist for moments like this one. At the very end, when all the questions were asked and all the answers were given, he stood up to leave the room. The journalists, reporters from the biggest outlets on earth, people who have covered 20 World Cups between them, gave him a round of applause. Bubista turned to face them and touched his heart. Nelson Semedo, the Portugal right-back who carries Cabo Verdean heritage, went on social media after the final whistle and wrote 3 words. Cape Verde won. And he was right. Not in the scoreline, in everything else. Cabo Verde left the 2026 World Cup having played 4 matches against Spain, Uruguay, Saudi Arabia, and Argentina, 3 former world champions among them, without losing a single game in normal time. They left with 18 Vozinha saves across the tournament. They left with a left-back whose goal will be replayed for decades. They left with a Dutch-born midfielder whose name people in Bulgaria are now saying very loudly. They left with a coach who found players on LinkedIn. They left having been praised by Thierry Henry, by Zlatan Ibrahimovic, by Paul Pogba, by Lionel Messi himself. They left as one of the most beloved teams in the history of football's greatest tournament.